Good evening. My name is Dylan Tipton, and I'm a junior McConnell Scholar. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all tonight as the McConnell Center continues its insightful lecture series on the importance of reading transformative books. This evening, we had the distinct honor of bringing back a true scholar and longtime friend, Dr. John Kleber. He will be leading us through Neil Postman's thought-provoking Amusing Ourselves to Death. Dr. Kleber is native to Louisville, Kentucky, where he graduated summa cum laude from Bellarmine University. He went on to earn his master's and PhD in history from the University of Kentucky. In 1968, he joined Morehead State University, dedicating 28 years to the institution before retiring as professor emeritus in 1996. His commitment to education and research earned him several accolades, notably the Governor's Outstanding Kentuckian Award in 1992. Dr. Kleber is widely respected for his editorial work on the Kentucky Encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia of Louisville, both of which are regarded as definitive resources on the region's rich history and culture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our esteemed friend and McConnell Center Fellow, Dr. John Kleber.
Thank you, Dylan. That was a very, very nice introduction. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you being here. I really do appreciate you giving up an afternoon and an evening to come here and be with me. I'm glad to be here with you. And I want to thank Dr. Gregg for this opportunity to come back to the McConnell Center. I really haven't been back since our retreat, and that's now more than two months ago. So any opportunity, I jump at it to be here. And particularly an opportunity to talk about this fascinating book, a book that has influenced my thinking for nearly 40 years. In fact, it has influenced it so much that Grace remembers that I used this book in interviewing the freshmen. And I laid it out there and I said, what do you think about this? And so you can see it's been very important to me. One of the people mentioned in this book is a man by the name of Samuel Morris. And he said, and I quote him, "What hath God wrought?" So I want to call this talk tonight, "What hath technology wrought?" Technology in the form of television. Now, I've heard it said time and time again that the man of the millennium was named Gutenberg. And I think he did something with print. And certainly that's important. But I've had arguments that I don't think he is the man of the millennium. To me, the man of the millennium was Samuel Morris, the inventor of the telegraph, because he harnessed electricity for instant communication that we take for granted today in many various forms. So when you communicate via your smartphone, and I know that's what it's called now, it is merely another form of that instant communication that we owe to Morris. Morris said it made one neighborhood out of a whole country, but it did much more than that. Some of you may know that my favorite book is called Walden. And in it, Thoreau knew the telegraph gave a new meaning to public discourse. And he said, public discourse has now become largely irrelevant, impotent, and incoherent. Those are strong words. Irrelevant, impotent, and incoherent. Public discourse. He wrote this, and I have quoted this many times, and I love this quote. He said, "We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas. But Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing instructive to communicate. We are eager to tunnel under the Atlantic and bring the old world some weeks nearer to the new. But perchance the first news that will leak through into the broad, flapping American ear will be that Prince Elided has the whooping cough. I think that's so insightful and so telling. Look what I had for dinner tonight. Let me show it to you on my smartphone. The prince has whooping cough. Thoreau asks us then, therefore, to take a very hard look at what we communicate, and why we communicate it. We know he spent much time alone at the pond or on trips, and instead of communication, he used his time to observe and to think. And when he was with company, he measured what he said by its importance, never wasting an idle word. In fact, he will say in the book, Walden, that there's nothing better than silence. What is it the scripture says? Be silent and know that I am your God. Be silent and know that I am your God. Well, that is something that has almost disappeared entirely. Itself, silence. Henry David Thoreau knew that the telegraph had consequences. And I want to mention our friend, and you know him from the retreat, Wendell Berry. And I think Dr. Gregg and I mentioned this amongst the freshmen, that Wendell Berry says that sometimes we do not consider consequences. We don't consider consequences in what we do as individuals or as society or as culture. My favorite Broadway play is The Music Man. And in The Music Man, Professor Harold Hill warned about the dangers of pool. He said, you've got trouble right here in River City. Professor Hill warned of the consequences. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of Professor Hills today, but Postman was one of them, warning us of consequences. So this is a book of consequences, and it's a book of bad consequences, and that is why it's important. I'll go through this show slowly because this really is the essence of the book. The book examines the effects of television culture on the manner in which we conduct our public affairs and on how entertainment values have corrupted the very way we think in every part of our life, be it politics, news, religion, education, or commerce. The very way we think has been reshaped to suit the requirements of television. And television is entertainment, and that is amusement, and so we are amusing ourselves to death. This past weekend, I spent a couple days up in Ohio, a place called Murphin Ridge Inn, bed and breakfast, beautiful place in the Amish country. Now, you know how beautiful the weekend was, right? But sitting in the lobby was a man about my age, maybe older. And every time I would come into that lobby, he was sitting there. And you know what he was doing? He had that little machine in front of him. He never looked up. He never said hello. He looked at that. So I thought, what is he doing? And so I walked behind him hoping that he was reading Walden. But he was playing a game. Incessantly playing a game. It was as if that was the only thing he could see. He sat alone, he sat quietly, playing that game. A commentator said, as a society, we are addicted to stimulation. Much of that stimulation is in the form of entertainment and hence amusement. And among the many definitions of amusement is the distraction of the attention from that which occupies it, such as business or worry. In other words, it is an escape from reality. Hence, it can almost be called a drug. And there are people who have called it that. And that's becoming more frequently used. In May of 1986, before any of you were born, long before any of you were born, I decided that I was going to get in the car and take a drive down the Natchez Trace. Never been down there before. And when I did, I took along Postman's book. Here it is, the old copy, hardback with Neil Postman's picture on the back. We said how ugly he was. He was an ugly man. There it is. Now, why did I take this particular book along the Natchez Trace? Well, the fact is that in 1986, I was, as Dylan indicated, teaching at Morehead State University. I had a small office. It had no window. And one day I came in, and there was this ugly machine sitting on my desk. It had been placed immediately on top of a white sheet of paper and a pencil, symbolic of the fact that I didn't need those anymore. It had a green screen, and at the top of it were things like F1 and F2. Dr. Gregg remembers an F1001. And the instruction book that sat beside it was nearly as large as the machine itself. It was, of course, a computer. Oh, God. The machine had come into the garden. In fact, that book that came with it was almost as large as the machine. In fact, one of my favorite books is entitled The Machine in the Garden. In it, the machines are railroads, but I felt that the machine had come to my garden in the form of a computer, and I was stuck with it. In the beginning, believe me, I was thoroughly confused about the complexity of it. It took me forever to learn that horrible thing. And I did so reluctantly. And I also began to question what it meant to me, to my work, and to my life. And so I asked, what hath technology wrought? Hence I turned to Postman for answers. And while Postman referenced television and not computers, they are both forms of technology that look alike and that present an image. I also questioned how far technology had progressed during my lifetime. Now, in spite of some of the vicious rumors that fly around, I did not know Samuel Morse, nor was I a friend of Andrew Jackson. So let me lay those to rest. But I have had a long life, and I have had seen a lot of changes in technology. When I was a boy, the method of technology that I dearly loved was the radio. And I spent long hours sitting by that radio, listening to it. And I would sit with my grandfather on the steps, and we would eat popcorn, and I would listen to Gabriel Heater, who would say, there's good news tonight from the war front. There's good news tonight. And then I'd turn the dial, and I would use my imagination to see Matt Dillon walking down the streets of Dodge City. The imagination was the greatest thing of radio. And if I didn't want to listen to the radio, which wasn't very often, I'd get up and go to the telephone. Now, the telephone. It had a rotary dial on it. And if I picked up the telephone, there was somebody talking, because we had what was called a party line. So what did you do? You put it down. You shouldn't listen, but of course we always listened. She's going to have her gallbladder out. Oh my goodness, that's interesting. So we'd put the telephone down and wait till they got off the party line. Then we'd pick it up and dial the number. And if God help you, if you had to call long distance, right, Dr. Gregg? If you called long distance, you paid a fortune for it. And you only did that after 6 o'clock at night or on weekends. Well, that's the way it was. And I still remember our telephone number, Jackson 4296. They always had names in front of them, Iroquois, Jackson, Cherokee, 4296. That's how you dialed, CH. Now, if I really wanted to be entertained, I went to the motion pictures. There was a motion picture on Baxter Avenue called The Airway. My mother would give me a quarter, get rid of me. Here, take this quarter and go to the pictures. So I'd go in and be filled with people my age. And we'd start with a cartoon. And then we'd go to the news. And then after the news, we'd go to what was called the serial, Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers. And at the end of Buck Rogers, he was falling over a cliff, so he had to come back next week to see how he didn't fall over the cliff. And then after Buck Rogers, there were previews of what was coming. And then two, not one, two pictures. That's why my mother gave me the quarter, because she knew me gone almost the whole day. And that was all for 25 cents. And if I wasn't going to the motion pictures, we played board games, and we played cards, and we played outside. And then came another machine into the garden, the big one. And I remember like yesterday, my mother standing with me in the kitchen, and she's saying, we're soon going to have something in which you can actually see an image in your living room, a picture. I said, you're crazy, Mama. A picture? Yes. And it's going to be called television. I hope in your lifetime you sometimes get to have the experience of awe. I haven't had it very often, but I will tell you, the first time I saw television, I experienced complete awe. We didn't have much money. In fact, 4 of us lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. So my father one night got a television set and brought it to our apartment and set it there. Well, again, I can still remember all of us sitting around that television watching Sid Caesar, completely enamored of what we saw. And then when he had to take the television back, I would go to the neighbor's house. 5 o'clock, time to go see Howdy Doody. 5:30, time for Captain Video. So I'd run to the neighbor's house. It wasn't until late that we got a television because we didn't have any money. And then the radio went away. Unfortunately, it went away. As a society, we got up from the front porch glider, went into the house, slammed the door, turned on the television set, waited for it to warm up, adjusted the antenna, and never looked back. Never looked back. Indeed, it has followed us wherever we go, into churches, schools, sports bars, smartphones, airlines. Last September, I flew to Rome on United Airlines. They set me in a seat, and in front of me was a little screen. You've all done this. You've all seen this. But my screen said, please wait. We took off. My screen said, please wait. We flew out over the Atlantic. Please wait. My television didn't work. So for 8 hours, I sat looking at please wait. While everybody else was doing what? Looking at movies. It had followed me onto the airport. And God's sports bars. If there's one place I'll take dynamite and destroy, it's sports bars. They are God's curse, or devil's curse upon us. They tell me in England their pubs are closing because everybody wants sports bars. All those television sets. What in the world, what hath God wrought indeed? Just yesterday, I went to Skyline Chili down here. And as I walked in, what's over there on the wall? Television, a screen. Didn't have any sound, but it was there because that was what we expected. And I kept glancing up at it. Had I been with somebody, it would have affected my conversation. So I would have liked Postman to say more about how television has, especially later technologies, also affected our art of conversation. Indeed, I say, what hath technology wrought? Well, certainly there were early Jeremiahs whose preaching of judgment and denunciation were all for naught. When I was a boy and television came out, we were warned it would hurt our eyes. And we were told never to watch it in a dark room. And there were actually television lamps that you placed on top of the television so it wouldn't hurt your eyes. And then it was called the boob tube. Still, we embraced it, even though it was a 12-inch screen, broadcast on 3 channels for 12 hours or less a day, in black and white, with test patterns to get out the ghost. And God help us, no remote control. For Postman, it heralded the end of the age of typography. You remember the ghost, Dr. Gray? Are you old enough to remember ghost? You had that test pattern, so you got it just right. I grew up in the neighborhood called the original Highlands, Broadway and Baxter. And up the street on Highland Avenue at Cherokee Road, what was called the Highland Public Library. And I would often walk up to the Highland Public Library. And there I found a reflection of the age of typography coming from the 18th and 19th centuries. There I was surrounded by the printed word appealing to my eye. To wit, Postman writes this: I will say once again that I am no relativist in this matter, and that I believe the epistemology created by television not only is inferior to a print-based epistemology, but it is dangerous and absurdist. But it is dangerous and absurdist. He uses the analogy here of a river that we have polluted. When we look at that river, we still see it. But if we go deeper into it, it is an ugly thing. Its value has been seriously diminished, and its degraded condition will have a harmful effect throughout the landscape. It is the electronic media that has changed and polluted the character of our symbolic environment. Last week, I went to my class reunion at Trinity High School. I'm not going to tell you which one because I didn't even know they did them that high up. Went to the reunion, went to a football game with Ballard, so I got to see that. But they took us on a tour of Trinity, and Trinity is, it is quite a high school. It has everything. But they took us into the library. And you know what? There were no books, or maybe a handful. They were all computers. No books, just computers. Certainly, those computers were there for a purpose. The printed word is found as an image on those machines. Machines, by the way, that look very much like televisions. No longer can a Trinity student stroll among the stacks. And the tragedy is, they probably don't want to. What hath technology wrought? Postman notes it brought change from the age of print to the age of image. Do you know that the first 15 presidents of the United States could walk down the street of any city and never be recognized? Never. Wouldn't know who they were. The first 15 presidents of the United States were known only by their words, not by their image. They were known by what, and I like the term he uses, black squiggles on white paper. He relates for us the Lincoln-Douglas debates, one of words, not of images. At Peoria, Illinois, on October the 16th of 1854, Douglas spoke for 3 hours. When Lincoln's turn came, he noted the time and he told the audience, why don't you go home and have dinner and return to hear my 3-hour oration? Today, how many people would return? They all returned to hear Mr. Lincoln. I spoke earlier of consequences, and one of those is now amongst us, and I'm guilty of it too, a shorter attention span. And so information is delivered to us in snippets. Indeed, today we take a measure of the world in 22-minute nightly news. ABC, CBS, NBC. 22 minutes, you know everything you need to know about the world. In their later debates for the Senate primary, Lincoln and Douglas spoke equally long, for it was an age of oratory, and those speeches were printed and read. It reminds me of my great hero, Thomas Paine, whose essay, Common Sense, was read by or to every living American, black or white, at the time, every living American. The word was printed, the word was read. The debates of Lincoln and Douglas gave off ideas. Today, our debates give off images. One often is asked, how could Abraham Lincoln be elected president today given the way he looked? He was out riding one day on the circuit and a woman approached him on horseback and she stopped and she looked carefully at him and she said, "My goodness, sir, you are the ugliest man I ever saw." And Lincoln thought about it and he said, yes, perhaps I am, but I don't know what I can do about it. She said, "Well, maybe you can stay at home." And then Lincoln at another time was giving a speech on a stump and some woman shouted out to him, you're ugly. You're two-faced. And Lincoln said, "If I were two-faced, do you think I'd have this one?" Well, he was a man of self-deprecation and humor. Now, I am old enough to remember the first presidential debate, 1960. Who were they two? Remember who they were? Kennedy and Nixon. And I will tell you, I think a lot of people would agree that Mr. Nixon lost the presidency that night of the debate. Why? Because of what he said? No. Because of how he looked. And he looked terrible. Terrible. Image. Gone is the word. The image has come. When I turned 21, it was a great day. I jumped in a car with a friend. It was a Pontiac, not a Bonneville, but one of those other, Grand Prix. It was a Pontiac Grand Prix. And we headed west. And that first night, we were in Amarillo, Texas. And the second night, we were in Las Vegas, Nevada. We traveled old Route 66, the Mother Road, to get to Las Vegas. 2 days, 1,800 miles. We checked into the Sands Hotel, $12.50 a night. Now, why did we go to Las Vegas? Because we wanted to be entertained. Let me say that Nevada has a very interesting history in the sense that even before gambling, it was a place where you could legally box in the country. Boxing was outlawed, except in Nevada. So people came to Nevada to watch boxing matches. And then came gambling. When we went to Nevada that year, it was the only place in America where you could legally gamble. The only place. There was no Atlantic City, even at that time. Now, of course, gambling is everywhere. Gambling is at our doorstep, across the river. There is something called Derby City, whatever that is. And of course, it's not gambling. Oh Lord, no. It's gaming. Yeah. I think if there's really been a significant change in my life, it's been the spread of gambling. It is everywhere now. Everywhere. Scratch-offs. You can do it on your phone probably, can't you? Gamble? Yeah. So that is something, that's one of the biggest changes I've seen. In this book, Postman says that if you look at the city of Boston, Boston is the city of the intellect, right? And New York is the city of commerce. And Chicago is a city of crime. No, it's much more than that. Much more than that. Carl Sandburg knew the true essence of Chicago when he wrote this. Hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and the nation's freight hauler, city of big shoulders, Chicago. One wonders what Sandburg would write about Las Vegas. Rome had its circuses. Medieval Europe had its joust. Tudor England had its Shakespearean plays. My grandparents had Charlie Chaplin. And we have Las Vegas. And here we are, or there we are, on the Strip, surrounded by gaudy signs enticing us to come inside where there are no windows, no clocks, only amusement 24/7. Get the plane ticket. Let's go amuse ourselves to death. Elvis has left the building. Postman does not conclude his book on an optimistic note. Toward the end, he says this: "For America is engaged in the world's most ambitious experiment to accommodate itself to the technological distraction made possible by the electric plug. This is an experiment that began slowly and modestly in the mid-19th century and has now reached a perverse maturity in America's consuming love affair with television." And he probably would say with smartphones today. One must conclude that the consequences of the experiment are not good when Postman recalls for us the writings of Aldous Huxley. In Brave New World, people come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. They love that. What affected the people was not that they were laughing instead of thinking, but that they did not know what they were laughing about. And they had stopped thinking. Well, I think we know what we're laughing about. We're laughing because we are constantly amused. Now, I want to end on a little bit different note, moving to a new book. And this is a book that I just finished. David Lenhart, called Ours Was the Shining Future. Notice the title closely. What do you note about the title? What's that? It's in the past tense. Very good, Carmen. Very good. It's in the past tense. Ours was the shining future. And as I finished this book, I tied it up. I was able to tie it up to Postman. Lenhart says that 2 decades into the 21st century, the stagnating of living standards has become the defining trend of American life. Let me repeat that. 2 decades into the 21st century, the stagnating of living standards has become the defining trend of American life. And Lenhart asks us, what has happened to the American dream, the promise of a happier, healthier, more prosperous future, which was once the inextricable part of our national identity? There was a time in this country, particularly about during and after World War II, there was a time when the government invested to improve the lives of everyone in the future. One saw this in transportation. One saw this in education. Once we had the best rail, highway, aviation, and educational systems in the world, bar none. Interstates were built. Higher education was subsidized. I went to college for almost nothing. because the state paid my tuition. That's what he's talking about. There was a time when that was done. But now things are different. Transformational changes are now concentrated in a few areas of human endeavor, mostly involving communications, entertainment, and information. For the rest of what humans care for, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, health, and working conditions, both inside and outside of the home, progress has slowed down since 1970. The stars of American capitalism today are Amazon, Apple, Google. And what are they? Forms of amusement. And so, I come now with a question to you, because I'm going to stop and we're going to have a discussion. I ask you this question. Are we amusing ourselves to death? I want you to help me answer these questions. Are we amusing ourselves to death? And if we are, what are the consequences for individuals, for society, for culture? And then I'd like you to answer this for me. If Postman were writing this book today, not 40 years ago, what would he say about our technology today? I think he probably would say, "What hath God wrought?" But maybe much more. So I want you to help me do something. I want you to help me update this book. Bring it down to 2024. You be Neil Postman. What do you see? What do you feel? Can you do that? Let's take a short break here, 5 minutes. Think about that, and we'll come back, and I'm going to open up to you. Okay?